Hello, everybody. It's so nice to see so many faces joining this Think and Drink. My name is James McLaughlin. I'm the CEO of Intelligentsia Coffee, and I'm also the Vice Chair of the WCR Board. It's absolutely my pleasure to welcome you to what has become, I think this is our second or third annual virtual Think and Drink. And to kick things off, I just wanted to give a special shout out to all the member companies of WCR who have joined today. Simply put, WCR is its member companies, and the organization wouldn't be here without all of you. Today, we have over 180 companies from every part of the world who donate to WCR and support the organization's mission to grow and protect the supply of quality coffee while improving the livelihoods of the families who produce it. At Intelligentsia, we have the privilege of working directly with some truly extraordinary coffee farmers in the Americas and Africa. And when we go to visit these farmers during the harvest, we're hearing an increasingly long list of concerns. The farmers are telling us about the effect that climate change is having on their seasons, how the coffee cherries are maturing, how diseases like Urrutia, which recently swept through Central America, are having just a real devastating impact on the productivity and quality that farmers are seeing. And, just simply put, like it's increasingly challenging to run a sustainable coffee farm. And I have a feeling that, many of these concerns resonate with all of you who are joining this call. I'm sure that you're hearing that from farmers that you're working with and just hearing about that through industry news. And one of the realizations that we had at Intelligentsia is that we as a company, nor the farmers that we're working with, really are scientists. And we don't have the tools or the systems to tackle the challenges that are facing coffee farmers. And really, this is where our investment in WCR comes into play. WCR is a scientific organization that's developing the tools that farmers, roasters, and the industry need to ensure, simply put, the future of coffee. And I can't tell you how excited I am about the work that WCR is doing, particularly our focus on plant breeding. As an industry, we finally have a scientific organization focused on the issues that farmers are facing. I've had the privilege to go down to visit WCR's farm in El Salvador and walk among the coffee trees that WCR has been developing. And I hear a lot about the pipeline of innovation that frankly is even stronger than the trees that are already in the ground. So you're going to hear a little bit about that today from the experts, from the WCR team. And really, I just wanted to thank you on behalf of the entire WCR board for joining today and hearing about the work that's happening. And most importantly, thank you for your support of the organization. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Hanna, who's going to get the day kicked off.
Hi guys, it's so lovely to be with you, even if we're far apart. We love this opportunity to gather with all of you. I want to give you a quick sense of sort of what we're going to be doing over the next hour, and then we're just going to dive right into conversation. So first, I'm going to spend a couple minutes just giving you a kind of very high level report out of what we did and accomplished in 2021. You all are invited to check out our annual report. We'll put the link in the chat in a couple of minutes. And then we're going to have a conversation with some of the leadership team at WCR. It's been a long time since we've had the opportunity to be in person with many of you. We did get to see some of you in Boston at Expo, which was wonderful. But this is a chance for us to reconnect and kind of have you all get to know us. Again, afresh, anew. So really quickly, I'm going to introduce my colleagues that we're going to be having a conversation with. Vern, Tania, Salvador, would you come in and say hi? Okay, so Vern Long, Dr. Jennifer Vern Long, many of you have met or know. She is our esteemed CEO. We have with us today, we're very excited to have with us today, Dr. Tania Humphrey, who has just joined WCR as our new research and development director. She has been on the job for something like 27 days. And so maybe less. So we are throwing her into the deep end of the pool today with all of you. And then we have Salvador Urrutia Loucel, who is our Director of Latin America Programs and is based in El Salvador. So we're going to come back and one-on-one have a conversation with this group about what we've been working on. And then, but before we do that, I'm going to kind of give you guys a high-level overview of where we've been these last couple of months. So I'll bring you guys back in just a second. Please feel free to, turn off your screens. Okay, and I am going to jump us ahead to our overview. Please feel free as we go to put any questions that you have into the Q&A box. We're going to have time for them at the end to come back. So please feel free to join us in conversation and send on your questions. So first of all, I just want to pause and say, this has been a hugely exciting few months. Having Tania join us, we have been doing a lot of work as an organization to really put the pieces in place to make our 2021 to 2025 strategy come to life. Many of you who are member companies know that we transitioned our funding model last year, and we are extremely grateful to all of the companies that came along with us on that journey. It is setting us up to have the kind of long-term sustainable funding that tree crop research requires, which is, it's a haul. We have done a lot to consolidate our programs. We're going to be expanding our nursery work into new areas, and we're going to tell you a little bit more about the exciting breeding program that we'll be launching later this year. So just a tremendous amount of work internally as an organization to get ourselves ready for a period of very exciting growth. One of the things I want to highlight is that the way that we work, which is with and through partners, also includes participating in large coffee development programs where, excuse me, where we're able to really see the impact of our work redoubled because of the way that this work is connected through these huge publicly funded programs that touch many, many, many farmers in many places. So just a high level view here of how some of that leverage works. Also just very proud that our knowledge products, our coffee variety catalog, our shade catalog, our good practice guides for nurseries continue to reach very big audiences all around the world. I have no idea what people in some of these 99 countries are doing because they're not all coffee producing countries, but they are coming to our website and downloading our products, and we are very excited about that. But of course, most excitingly is the technical program. So as many of you know, WCR has 4 main technical areas that we work in: nurseries, trials, and breeding. Breeding being the most long-term, trials being a little bit shorter term in terms of the impact to farmers, the timeline to impact a farmer's field, and nursery work being work that can have a very immediate impact. If you are producing healthy seedlings and have good genetic assurance on those plants, the impact in a farmer's field can be almost immediate in terms of the benefit to production. So those are 4 technical areas. We have, over the last year, very excitingly, watched a couple of our longer term projects begin to really come into maturity. Many of you have heard us talk about our international multi-location variety trial. This is a trial of many varieties being grown in many countries on many sites around the world, where we can compare how those different varieties perform in different environments. Those trials started going in the ground in 2016. As you all know, coffee is a tree crop, so it takes a while for it to grow and begin producing a mature harvest that is suitable for tasting. But many of those trial sites have now begun to mature. Similarly, we have some F1 hybrid variety trials happening in a couple locations and a few others. And so last year, we did a ton of cupping. It was very exciting. Some of you probably received boxes of coffee from us. We were able to send out 75 different either varieties or candidate varieties that are in the F1 hybrid breeding program, or wild accessions of coffee to cuppers at over 107 coffee companies, and had a lot of fun interacting with folks and getting feedback and data from them about cup quality. And I just want to pause and note that this is one of the most exciting parts of our work, is the opportunity to help build a bridge between the trials and the breeding work that's happening at Origin and the industry. So you all are helping provide feedback on these varieties that ultimately will become, many of them, commercialized in new places or for the first time, and to understand what their quality potential is, and if it is really something that is meeting the needs of coffee companies, is a significant part of this bridge role that we see for ourselves. I mentioned the international variety trial. We now have 10 out of our 26 global sites that have reached maturity, which means we can really begin to do a lot of sophisticated statistical analysis of the data. This is just one small example graph, a kind of overview of how globally, when you average performance across all of the trials that we have that are mature, how those varieties are performing in terms of both yield and their susceptibility to rust. And there often is a correlation, right? The varieties that are most susceptible to rust will generally be highly impacted and have less yield. So just a small example, we're seeing that 2 of the varieties in the trial are existing commercially available F1 hybrids that were released in 2010. And it's confirming that indeed the hybrids are performing very well in terms of both yield and rust. But we're going to have much more data coming soon. We will be producing a global analysis and reports that will be shared out with our country partners and with you all over the course of the next few months. So stay tuned for that. I mentioned that our nursery work has been expanding quite a bit, and that is super exciting because, as I also mentioned, that is where we see the kind of shortest time to impact in terms of the impact for farmers. So one of the things that we really started doing quite a bit more over the last year is seed lot testing. So nurseries are where farmers may go to get a particular seedling, but the nurseries are getting their seed from seed lots. So these are basically coffee farms where they're taking a portion of their coffee seed and selling it as seed instead of as exportable beans to be roasted. And one of the things that we found is we have analyzed a large number of them in 5 Latin American countries, is that we have a really high proportion of non-compliant seeds. So this is where either there's been a mix-up or mislabeling, or more likely cross-pollination within the seed lot. And this matters a lot because, not because genetic purity is in and of itself some, perfect ideal, but because it can affect performance. And so farmers need to have assurance that the thing they think they're buying is the thing they're buying so that they can manage it appropriately. And 76% non-compliance, if you were to think of any other product in the world that you had a quality control process for, like, I don't know, a vaccine, 76% non-compliance would feel like an absurdity. And it is an absurdity. So it just shouldn't be this way. Farmers should have more assurance that what they're buying is what they think they're buying, and assurance that it will perform the way that it's supposed to, or the way that they have been taught to manage it. So it is a huge problem. We know it's a huge problem, and it's something that is commonly a problem in many, many coffee producing countries. It's not one place alone. One project we're really excited about participating in is a renovation effort in El Salvador. The government of El Salvador is pursuing a large renovation project that would replace pretty significant number of trees in their coffee landscape. And for the first time, a large renovation project is going to be able to use these kinds of quality assurance tools to make sure that the plants that are going out to farmers, which will be in the millions, are the right plants and are healthy plants. And that can have an impact on productivity for both those individual farmers, but also for the entire El Salvadoran coffee sector for the next 30 years. If you put a sick plant or a plant that's not the right one in the ground, its lower production potential is going to remain for the entire life of the plant. You've sort of locked it in. But the opposite is also true. When you put a healthy plant that's the right plant for the environment and the right plant for that farmer in the ground, you have locked in the higher production potential for the life of the plant, which is really critical, right? Because the next few decades are going to be tremendously important for farmers. Lastly, almost lastly, and we're going to talk a little bit more about this in our conversation, WCR has begun to move into a new area in our kind of global leadership portfolio, which is mobilizing additional public support for coffee R&D across the board. We're focusing our work in the US right now, but we hope to expand and plan to expand into working in Europe as well. And this is just recognizing that we're one organization. There is so much need in terms of the research agenda for coffee. And the more that we can crowd in funding and support for that work, whether it's coming to WCR or going to academic institutions, universities, other researchers, or directly to the national research programs in coffee producing countries that really historically have handled this for all of us. So some of you have picked up the phone and called your congressperson, if you're in the US, and advocated for some of these additional funding streams, and we are greatly appreciative of that. It's been tremendously exciting and successful so far. And last but not least, and we will talk again a little bit more about this, but probably the thing that we're most excited about and most focused on as an organization right now is getting our new, what we call the Coffee Population Improvement Network, or sometimes for short, we call it our Coffee Breeding Network, up and running in 2022. And this is a large program that will involve the participation of probably 7 or 8 coffee countries, their national research institutions. And what WCR will be doing is creating new crosses to become improved populations that these countries can then work with to develop new varieties. So WCR is providing the kind of raw material for breeding, as well as some of the technical supports and tools. We're also forming, the backbone for this global network where data sharing is happening across the countries. But ultimately, variety development will be in the hands of the countries themselves, which is where it should be. This is something we've been working towards for the last decade of our existence. And we are just so excited to have Dr. Humphrey on board. She's going to help us lead this to become a reality over the course of this year. And it's going to continue to be one of our most important pieces of work, hopefully for the next few decades. So we look forward to telling you a little bit more about that. I also, I mentioned that we had transitioned our funding, our way of doing membership for our member companies. And I also said that was specifically and directly in support of this ambitious agenda that we are launching. So I just want to thank all of the companies that came along with us on that journey, and encourage any of you out there who are part of coffee companies or the coffee industry to consider joining us. It's not possible for us to do this work without you. We are an industry-driven organization. So there's some contact information here, and we can put it in the chat as well. But just ending on the note that, we are our member companies and our partner organizations. WCR is a small organization, and it's really through these partnerships and via our member support that we're able to do everything that we do. So thank you for all of that. And now we're going to turn to conversation. So I have been talking for plenty long enough. I'm really excited to bring into the conversation with me right now, Dr. Jennifer Long, Vern, as we call her. Thank you, Vern. Vern, I want to just start with a really big question, a really broad question, because many of you have been to our website and you've seen our tagline, ensuring the future of coffee. What is the future of coffee? What does the future of coffee agriculture need to look like 20 years from now if we are going to survive and thrive as an industry?
Thank you so much, Hanna, and thank you all for joining us today. We're really excited to be here to share more about our activities and the work of our partner network, and the support that you all give is really critical to moving this forward. When we think about the future of coffee, I think the most important reality is that we will drive that together. It's the vision that we share together. So it's less about my vision and more about the shared vision of producing countries and the industry at large. And I think that there are some definitely market signals and policy signals we're seeing. There is a desire definitely to reduce the amount of emissions coming from coffee agriculture. That's going to come as like a business opportunity for some, and a policy directive and a regulatory directive for some. There's going to be a desire to produce coffee in ways that increases the biomass on the landscape, as we think about ways to not only reduce emissions, but actually absorb more carbon, and really think differently about how our agricultural systems respond to the crisis that we have with the climate crisis. The reality is that labor markets are also changing as countries get wealthier and farmers have more options of different commodities to potentially export. We're seeing a really, really strong need to distribute supply with the COVID crisis and with the current geopolitical challenges we're seeing. Distributed supply is really valuable for everyone, not having concentrated supply. And I think that that's shared across commodities and across borders. And so when we think about the future of coffee agriculture, we see that there's a world of innovation that can support that. And so when we think about what's needed for the future, I would say it's going to be the kinds of technologies that help support the coffee agriculture that we want for our industry and producing countries want, on the ground in producing areas. What does that look like? We need to define it, and then we need to mobilize an innovation agenda to get us there. It doesn't just happen magically. We make intentional choices about the world we want, and we build the technology to support that vision that we have together. And I think the other piece is just the reality of labor availability. We know that particularly for Arabica production, labor pools are needed to harvest the coffee, to process the coffee, and thinking about the world we are going to be living in 20 or 30 years, where there are many different opportunities for people as they think about their place in the economy and where they want to be. Mechanization is definitely an area that we're likely going to see. We're already seeing it in some countries, certainly Brazil and others have really explored this, and some countries are really moving very quickly to develop small scale mechanization. And that's going to be a theme that we're going to see increasingly over the coming years as producers are figuring out how to make this a profitable endeavor to really provide for their families and for the community. So what I see is tremendous opportunity. There are challenges for sure. Climate change is no joke, as James described in his remarks earlier. The climate crisis is real, but we're a tree crop. We have so much that we can bring to the community, and the innovation agenda that helps our tree crop contribute to reducing the challenges the world's facing, it's pretty exciting. And that's why I'm really excited to be here with WCR.
That's awesome. Thank you, Vern. I get to work with that enthusiasm every day, so I'm the lucky one. I'm going to bring Tania on now, our new Research and Development Director. Tania, welcome to WCR.
Thanks, Hanna.
It's so great to have you. We are so excited. I'm going to have you, I know I mentioned we're throwing you into the deep end here, so you're just getting your coffee legs, because you're coming to WCR after years and years of working with vegetable and fruit crops, not with coffee. Knowing that this is really your first month on the job, you're still figuring out this coffee thing. Can you say a little bit about what challenges you think coffee has that are common with other crops that you've worked with versus unique to other crops, and maybe what coffee has to learn from other crops that are going to help us prepare for this future that Vern just teed up for us?
Yeah, sure. So, I'm a plant biologist, and from my perspective, coffee is another perennial tree crop. It's plant agriculture. It's a complex biological system from which we're trying to extract some hugely valuable resources. So really, a lot of what we've learned from other plant agricultural systems can be applied directly to coffee, whether it's production practices, pest control, propagation techniques, these kinds of things there's immediate application. But more specifically, we're focused on plant varieties and breeding. So when you break it down to plant genetics and DNA, then we have the ability to capitalize on a huge number of tools that are available or have been developed for other systems. I mean, DNA is DNA. And so we can really tap into that knowledge, all of those techniques and approaches, and apply some of those, or, adapt them, apply them directly to coffee. Tools such as genetic markers, genomic selection, bioinformatics, or even big data and sophisticated high-end statistical analysis. All of these types of tools can be applied to coffee and can really help us to fast track the breeding process. They can allow us to deal with much higher volumes, numbers of trees, and ultimately to help select that individual plant that is the high-performing, high-potential variety that we're looking for. So it allows us, all of these tools allow us to do this more efficiently, faster, cheaper than ever before. And of course, the technologies are constantly evolving. So that gives us, another advantage. But of course, it's not all about faster, cheaper, more efficient. It's not just about the process, but really the more we understand about plant biology, plant genetics, then the more sophisticated and creative we can get with the approaches we use and the way we design our breeding strategies. For example, we might identify new sources of disease resistance, or maybe we want to optimize plant architecture for some of the mechanization and automation that Vern just spoke about. Or we can do really cool things like tweak the metabolite profiles of the chemicals in the coffee bean to, optimize the right profile to improve cupping quality, or perhaps create differentiated flavors and new types of consumer experiences. And all of these things, they've done this in other crops, and we have the potential to do this in coffee. So there's really enormous potential. There's a whole lot of different approaches that we can use. And what we also have, what makes coffee different, is we have, this enormous untapped potential. Coffee genetics is relatively underexplored and underdeveloped. So really just a few tweaks, a few little things we can do can create enormous genetic gains. So this huge potential is really what excites me about moving into coffee. And I think there's all kinds of great things we can do.
That's very exciting. Two enthusiastic colleagues. We dropped a link in the chat to, it's now a little bit of an older article. It's from 2014 from Scientific American, but it's about how some of these modern genetics technologies can be used to improve flavor and other things in vegetables and fruits without genetic modification. I think whenever we are talking about tweaking and genetics, that's the first question I get is, are you talking about genetic modification? And right now, no. What we're really doing is using modern approaches to genetics to make the traditional old school breeding process faster and more efficient and more targeted. So I'll just remind folks, please feel free to drop in your questions for any of our guests today, and we'll circle back to them. Thank you so much, Tania. Okay. I'm going to bring Salvador forward now because hi, Salvador.
Hi.
Probably the question I get the most when I'm out talking to our community of partners and member companies is, so, this is all great. It sounds lovely, but how does this work get to farmers? So you're the director of our programs in Latin America. You work very closely with many of our partner organizations. Can you talk a little bit about how WCR fits into this whole ecosystem of research and farmer support that already exists in many of these countries? And how does our work, we talk about unleashing the potential of varieties. How does that actually work? How does it reach farmers? And what are some of the key challenges?
Okay, Hanna, thank you so much. Exciting to be here with all of you. It's a good question. really, because I think at the beginning we need to understand two things. WCR work through the institution in the countries. This is the first statement that I can mention. And the second one is to understand the pathway that the new varieties, or when we transfer knowledge to the farmers, does. Uh, Typically, or in general terms, the creation of new varieties is through the national coffee institutions. This institution exists in most of the countries that we work, particularly in Latin America, with a long-standing experience. Most of them are more than 50 or 60 years working here, and during this time, they make a huge improvement to the coffee sector, not only in the countries but also in the entire region. For example, we have a institution like Ana Café, IH Café in Honduras, another Café in Costa Rica, that of course, during all of these times, they bring new varieties or new options to the farmers. So in this case, we need to fix with them. We are really an institution that we are inserting this ecosystem, supporting these national coffee institutions, and trying to help them to create more and better varieties for farmers, and also to have more access to technology and modern tools that they can use for this mission. We have also to say that as WCR, we are not going directly, we are not training farmers, for example. We are not distribute varieties to them, because all of these activities are through the partners. These partners, like I mentioned before, originally are the National Coffee Institution, but also another ONGs or other specific project that appears in the countries. For example, Technocer, CRS, or other that have directly contact with the farmers in the first line, and they bring in the farmer hands all of these technologies or good practices for increased varieties. So in this case, it's key to have this in mind because it's our role. And I insist that our successful as WCR is to work very closely with these national coffee institutions, very closely with the partners, that we identify also the industry that are present in these countries in Latin America, that is the region that I represent. And this is the successful for our work, and to bring them the knowledge and the technology that we can give them. A clear example, and you mentioned in the slide that you presented, Hanna, is how we can release new varieties in this country. Typically this occurs by a national level, but also when this occurs, this can be also released to other countries in the region, and to complement the needs. And of course, at WCR, we have a specific program, for example, to help them to clean up the seed lots, to give them the opportunity with new technologies, to obtain better mother plants that produce seeds. And these seeds also have the huge contribution to the farmer, because it's always happened that in the countries, the governments follow up the distribution of these seeds and in other cases also to create plants. So we are happy to help these ecosystems of the national institutions. That of course is the principal key for us to bring them our technology and to work very closely. This is for me what we are doing as WCR. I entered to this organization in 2016, and since this time, I have been working with the country very closely, and also in particularly in Central America with Promecafe, that is like an umbrella that cover many of these institutions that exist in the different countries. So happy to work with them, and also I think we have a clear future with this new program that you announced too in the slide that we have as an organization. And this program launched since 2022 and the future can bring more opportunity to the farmers. At the end of the day, we work all of us for the farmers, and these farmers to provide the input that need our industry in coffee.
Thank you so much, Salvador. That's an excellent segue to our next question, which is I'm going to bring Tania back to talk with us a little bit more about the breeding program or the breeding network that I talked about very briefly before, because everything that Salvador just described in terms of how we work with and through these longstanding institutions that historically have really done all of this work for us on our behalf as an industry. They have done all the breeding that has been done so far. It's all rested with these public institutions like Ana Café, like Sana Café, like the Embrapa institutions in Brazil. So this new program, our breeding network, really works with and through those institutions. Tania, can you talk a little bit about the breeding program? What are its goals? How's it going to work? What can we expect from it?
Yeah, for sure. So basically, the goal of our global breeding network is really about sharing resources and coordinating efforts in coffee breeding and variety development. So, in other crops, a lot of breeding is done by commercial seed companies, our broadacre field crops like corn and soy, but even smaller crops like vegetables, tomatoes, cucumbers, that kind of thing. It's mostly done in seed companies. But in coffee, it's largely handled by the public sector, by individual countries where the government invests money in coffee breeding and development as a way to support their farmers and to help them maintain their competitive edge over their competitors, which is usually their neighboring countries with whom they compete for a share of the global exports. But when it's done on a country by country scale, it's usually fairly small. It may not be as sophisticated with some of these high throughput, large volume, sophisticated techniques. And individual countries can't always operate at that scale. It's just too expensive, too difficult for them to apply those kind of approaches in coffee. So what WCR is doing is really about helping the countries come together to pool resources and to bring some of these modern tools into coffee breeding to make the process of breeding, as I described earlier, faster, cheaper, more efficient, and ensuring that we're really addressing the key challenges of farmers and of buyers that matter for the global market, but also for the individual countries. And the critical piece of it is we leave the finished variety development piece up to the breeding programs in the individual countries to do that themselves. So really WCR's role is what we think of as providing the back end support to a whole network of countries, developing the tools, doing the global data analysis, doing breeder training and capacity development, but most importantly, to develop large populations of genetically diverse material. So this, what we call the core germplasm collection. So a huge diverse collection of germplasm, which is really the kind of unfinished varieties, the diverse genetic material that provides the resources on which you can build a breeding program. And so we provide that material for the individual countries to test and develop in their own local environment. And it's through the creation of this network that we can enable the global coordination for testing in multiple different environments in different countries, and to all be benefiting from the results of that coordinated effort. And so when the countries engage in the network, they get a seat at the table, essentially. They get involved in the governance and decision-making of the network to help shape the target traits, the types of crosses that are made, and decision making on how it's run. Each country receives a bunch of plants, they manage their own trials, they collect the data on performance on kind of a 6-year cycle. And so then that data is then fed back into the system where we do all the global analysis and make the decisions on which crosses to do in the next round. So, breeding is a cyclical process and it's long term. We're talking about sort of 20 odd years before we'll get varieties out the end of the pipeline, and multiple cycles through that we go through to get there. So the key thing is it's a transformational approach. There hasn't been a global collaboration on breeding like this ever in coffee. And it provides a huge amount of really diverse material for individual countries to work with. So it's collaborative, it's highly collaborative. It relies on all those national coffee institutes and country partners that Salvador talked about. But what it also does is it retains the ability for individual countries to do their own variety finishing and release the commercial varieties for their own countries that really meet the needs that they are seeing. So the key part of it is that because it's global, this is also a critical element for allowing us to address climate change. So if you think about a small country, for example, in Guatemala, they only have a very narrow range of climatic environments in which to breed and test different coffee varieties. So if Guatemala is trying to breed for the future, they really need to be thinking about different types of environmental conditions, different climates that they need to be breeding for. So being part of this network allows them to tap into the whole global resources. And perhaps there's a variety that's being developed in Kenya, or data that's showing the performance of variety in Kenya that more closely emulates the environmental conditions that in Guatemala they may be facing in 20, 30, 50 years. And so being part of this network allows them to access that data, to see the performance of varieties, and to be able to basically share all those results and allow countries to access the material that makes most sense for them. And by working together, this enables the whole network, the whole coffee industry, to really be better prepared for what's coming in the future. And so it's really through the participation of these national partners and this entire global network approach that we can really move the bar and push this forward. And that's really a critical piece of it.
Thank you so much, Tania. Wow, we threw you into the deep end and you are swimming.
Yeah.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much. I'm gonna bring us back over to Vern now. We're gonna have two more questions with Vern, and then we're gonna move to all of your questions. Vern, I said just a tiny bit about this at the beginning, but there is so much need in coffee, in general, but also in coffee research and development. There's basic science, things like sequencing the genome of coffee leaf rust. There's genetic resource protection, so protecting wild coffees so that they are around for the future when we may need them. WCR, as we've heard, is focusing really on this idea of kind of unleashing the potential of coffee varieties through breeding, trials, and nursery work. But there's this whole universe of other things that need to be done. So can you talk a little bit about how WCR has shifted to developing an agenda for driving increased overall funding and support toward coffee R&D and what that has looked like?
Absolutely. And thank you, Hanna. So when we look out at the landscape of sources of supply of research, there are obviously, as we've described, the National Coffee Institutes have been engaging in this space for decades. Universities around the world have been tackling specific problems that face coffee production. But when we compare the level of investment through public investment and some private investment in all the research that happens in coffee, and we compare that to other commodities, whether it's corn and soy or even apples or strawberries, the level of investment relative to the value of our crop, there is a huge investment gap. And that investment gap has real consequences. It means that when Roya raged across Central America, farmers were scrambling for solutions, that there had not been sufficient investment just because you have to make so many trade-off decisions between so many competing priorities that with limited investment, you have to, there's stuff that doesn't get done. And yet the challenges still come whether you're ready or not. And so when I think about the mission statement of WCR, which is to ensure the long-term supply of quality coffee, but also to be really attentive to the livelihoods of the families who produce it, it's that two sides of our mission statement. We're really concerned about supply because we all want to be in business in the next 50 to 100 years. But we also want to make sure that the people in our community, from the producers all the way to the baristas, are taken care of, right? We really want to make sure that our industry is sustainable and robust and prosperous for everyone along the supply chain. Well, other commodities invest tremendous amounts in research to make that happen. Agricultural research has been a mainstay of addressing these challenges for the last 150 years. And when we look at what has been happening in coffee, there just simply hasn't been an equivalent level of engagement with the public sector to mobilize resources for some of these goals. So when I think about the role of WCR, it's very clear to me that with our mission statement and the available resources that we have and the capacity we have as an organization, the need is much bigger than what we as an organization can deliver directly. And so what we can do and what we have a power to do is, as an industry organization that's run by member companies, we can actually consolidate your voice and raise it to start tackling these bigger challenges that are existential for us. I think that with the climate crisis, I think everyone's really starting to see just how serious this is, and we need to work together to mobilize that investment. There are very specific actions and there are very specific tasks that we can do together to both identify what our priorities are. And so just using our mission statement is how we started this year. So this is our very first year. And frankly, I'd really like to hear from you all how you all have felt about this advocacy engagement over the coming months so that we can really refine our process and be more responsive and engaging with the broader community. But what we did is we took the first two pieces of legislation that were actively happening right now. One is the Global Food Security Act, which is a piece of legislation in the United States that focuses on smallholder agriculture in producing countries. And it's focused not just on coffee, but on many commodities. It's about food security for the future. And that's very consistent with the interests of our industry. We want to make sure that farmers in rural areas are successful and that the resources and technology are available to them. And we also want coffee agriculture to be, a beneficiary of this kind of large investment as part of a broader global food security agenda. And so in that regard, we've been engaging to really ensure that smallholders remain a focus of that investment, to make sure that smallholders benefit from those kinds of investments, but also to look at the agricultural R&D investments in that legislation. There's a lot of our ag R&D funded through that, but none of it's been on coffee. So we've been asking for more consideration of coffee where it makes sense in producing countries. The other piece is around Coffee Plant Health Initiative Amendments Act, and that's specifically around, the Roya raged across Central and South America, and then in 2020 it was detected in Hawaii. And like I said, with insufficient longstanding research to really support technology development to tackle these big challenges when they arrive, that investment gap had significant consequences, and Hawaiian growers are facing the challenges that many others have faced over the last 150 years when Roya has arrived on their shores. And so in response, a piece of legislation is moving through right now that we've been mobilizing advocacy and outreach on, is to essentially direct USDA to provide that latitude for USDA, the Department of Agriculture in the US, to invest in agricultural research to address plant health and disease issues facing coffee. And that wasn't there before. There was one very small allocation for coffee berry borer, and that was it. But there are many pests and diseases in coffee. And so this is the kind of thing where just getting the door to open to address the full scope of issues provides technologies not just for Hawaiian growers, but for growers around the world, because science generates public goods. And when you develop public goods, those can cascade to many, many producers around the world. But if we don't get prioritization on these key challenges facing coffee, it won't happen. And so that's why we have to raise our voice to really mobilize and increase awareness in Congress about these challenges and in legislative bodies around the world in many consuming countries. we have a stake in this in consuming countries. And we, as an organization, WCR, is really excited to work very closely with producing countries to clarify what those challenges are over time, develop a shared global priority list. Like, what is it that we really want everyone to be investing against to make sure that somewhere those resources are being mobilized for science? And it's not going to be executed by WCR. It'll be collaborations between institutions in the countries where that, investment's happening, but connected to producing country research institutions to both strengthen the capacity of our partner countries, but also to really ensure that that research is targeted on the most critical things facing our industry in the short, medium, and long term. So advocacy isn't just about raising your hand, but it's also having the tough conversations to figure out what our priorities are. And that's the effort that we need to embark on over the coming years, is to really, really clarify what's our agenda, what are we most concerned about from an importing perspective, member companies of WCR, but as well producing countries, the challenges in production agriculture that you're facing, and then really coming together in that shared agenda, that bridge, that slide that we use a lot. We are seeking to be that bridge to clarify the agenda and then to mobilize the action to close that investment gap. We can totally do it, and we just need to get started.
That's awesome, Vern. Thank you. I'm going to bring Tania and Salvador back for some questions from our audience. Thank you all for posting those. I'm going to stick with you for a second, Vern, because I think that's a nice bridge into two of the questions. I'm going to merge them into one. We talk a lot about how WCR is industry-led, and I think you just did a pretty good job of describing one of the key ways in which we are industry-led, right? Which is that we're kind of consolidating, we're working with all our member companies who are companies, right, funding the work. So your industry, you're leading us through your funding, but also, coming together around a shared agenda and saying, okay, there's other resources out there. There are academic institutions, there are other researchers working on coffee, coming together around a sort of priority agenda, and then looking for resources to flow toward that agenda, whether it's stuff we do ourselves as WCR or whether it's academic research happening at a university, et cetera. So there were sort of two questions, which is how can roasters be involved, and how do we work together with academic institutions that are doing stuff? And I think I kind of answered the question in my lead up, but I'm gonna hand it over to you to just offer the summary for those two pieces.
So I think there's two parts to this. The first is defining the agenda. It's the governance. And I know that's a really boring word for a lot of you, but this just means, what should we prioritize as an industry? When we think about the long-term supply of coffee and the livelihoods of the producers who are producing it, what are the challenges that our industry is facing? And we need to define a set of priorities. And that's what governance is. It's that duking it out in a conversation, in a room, in a chat room, figuring it out. What are our priorities? And then the second part is the execution. Once those priorities are identified, we mobilize a tactical game with our member companies to engage members of Congress, to engage science granting agencies, to engage parliaments, to prioritize this investment because it's a problem for our industry and all of the consequences of those problems. So if we don't have coffee, we can't employ baristas. If we don't have coffee, producers are going to shift to other crops. And so what are the consequences? So defining the priorities is step number one. And that's a collaborative process with the scientific community, but also with the industry, because we as an industry have a lot of different priorities and goals. Regulators have different goals and objectives. It's about consolidating that view to a set of priorities. When it comes to execution, of socializing those priorities, we want to unlock resources for the university community, for the research community. Mm-hmm. And that's a second piece of this advocacy agenda. When it comes to the way that WCR collaborates, that's on the execution of the things that we think are priorities. So we recognize that we have in-house resident capacity in certain areas, and we recognize that we have large gaps in capacity in other areas. But our goal is not to fill all the gaps. Our goal is to provide a strategic catalytic function where a global role makes a lot of sense. And so when we think about collaborating with universities, we realize that the depth of the bench at universities and research institutes is far, far greater. I mean, we don't even have a physical place. We're all in our respective remote locations. So when we look to universities, we see that the tremendous capacity that research institutions bring to the table are critical. And we look to you when we unlock those resources and granting programs. We look to the university community to make those applications and put coffee on your list of priority activities. So I would say that's sort of the big picture on how advocacy connects to mobilizing resources for researchers to pursue opportunities for research. The other piece of this is our direct collaboration. And so we privilege and prioritize those collaborations with National Coffee Institutes. That's been our primary partner in most of the work that we do because of their unique position in producing countries to move varieties into distribution systems. And there's different distribution systems for different countries. So when we think about over the coming years, as we launch this global breeding network and we start to see some of the challenges in executing it. So there are questions that aren't answered and we need better systems, as Tania described. Some things we just need to do it better, faster, and cheaper. And we need to adjust those technologies and tools to coffee. Those are the kinds of research collaborations that we'll be embarking on with partners and developing collaborative research proposals to granting agencies to solve those problems, to make the network better and easier for all the participants and more useful to the network. So those would be the two ways that I'd explain that, but I'm happy to kick it over to my fellow panelists to offer some additional color.
Well, I'm going to jump back in really quick and say, so one of the questions we had was, what can roasters do? And I'm going to do the easy thing and fun to say, become a WCR member company. So part of that is funding to do the work. But as Vern said, as we embark on this advocacy agenda where we're trying to drive additional public funding and support for coffee R&D, the only reason that works, the only reason a legislative body is going to vote to dedicate resources to coffee, which, except for outside of Hawaii, isn't really grown in the US, is because member companies are coming to them and saying, this matters to us, this is important. And so, WCR is a way of kind of consolidating, we keep using that word, but our priorities as an industry, and it enables us to both do the work directly, but then also move resources toward other people doing important work too, like the researchers at Purdue University that are sequencing the rust genome. That's essential basic science that has global impact for all coffee researchers and coffee producers everywhere. And it's going to be done because the US government granted $4 million to an American scientist to get it done, partly because people picked up the phone. So, I would say those are the two really critical things that we're looking to our community of coffee companies to do right now is join us and pick up the phone. A more technical question here. So I think I'll send this one over to you, Tania. So folks on this call might have heard us talking before about F1 hybrid varieties, which I mentioned in one of my slides. We're seeing that they have, they're relatively new to coffee, only introduced in the last 10 years or so. We're seeing that they have good production potential, good field performance in general in research trials, et cetera. But one of the big challenges with F1 hybrids is that you can't save the seed, or it's very risky for a farmer to save the seed. And to have good performance, you really need to have clones, clonal propagation. This is a huge bottleneck though, right? Cloned varieties they're a little more expensive. There's not as many facilities that can produce them. So we have a question here that, are there plans to develop stable varieties from successful F1 hybrids because of this bottleneck, or how do we deal with this bottleneck with F1 hybrids?
Yeah, so I can start to address that. I think this actually also intersects with what Vern was talking about with being industry focused. So, the F1 hybrids is a big strategic question we're debating internally a lot right now, is exactly what is the path going forward. But part of this idea about being industry focused is to really think about some of these questions. We're a research organization, but you can't do science and research in a vacuum. You have to think about, how does it actually move out to the marketplace? We want to have actual on the ground impact for farmers. And so we have to look at some of these questions, like, where are the bottlenecks in the system? Okay, we've got a great new variety, but yes, you're absolutely right. The propagation of that variety is potentially a huge bottleneck, particularly if you're thinking about vegetative propagation of F1 hybrids. And so while I don't have the immediate answer to what the solutions are, absolutely it's in our sights, and we're considering what are the options and how do we overcome some of these challenges. And that's why, we talked a lot today about the breeding network and our efforts in breeding, but we have a whole parallel stream in nursery development, because I think Hanna had a couple of slides at the beginning. We recognize that you can't just breed a great variety. You have to have the entire system, the whole supply chain in place to get the varieties in the hands of farmers. And so that question about propagation, whether it's F1 hybrids or whatever varieties we're dealing with, it's the same kind of issue. We have to work through it and figure out a practical solution that works for the partners on the ground.
I'm recognizing that there's not a silver bullet. It's right. It's looking at many different solutions for different markets, different problems, different challenges that we have. That's a great question. I just glanced up and realized that we are at time. We are at 9:01. So just to be respectful of everyone's time, we're going to end there. There were a few other questions that people had that we are providing some answers to in the chat. I just want to thank all of you for joining us today and spending an hour of time with us, getting to hear about what we've been working on in NOAS. Please feel free to send questions by email if you didn't get a chance to ask them in the chat and you have them. We are grateful for your partnership and for your collaboration and support and your curiosity. And we look forward to being with you in person at some point if we can be. So thank you, everyone. Thank you to my guests, my colleagues for being with us today. Thank you to James for introducing this event. And we look forward to seeing you all soon.
Okay,
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.